It began as a calculated disturbance on the charts, but it evolved into a catastrophe that would define the winter of 2026. By the time the winds finally began to fade, the silence left behind was deafening, broken only by the grim reality of 106 confirmed lives lost, and over 400,000 homes and businesses still plunged into absolute darkness. This was Winter Storm Fern. But why did a single atmospheric event manage to paralyze a continent-sized swath of land from the high deserts of New Mexico to the density of the East Coast? How did modern infrastructure crumble so completely, turning heated homes into freezing traps and highways into graveyards? And most terrifying of all, as the snow settles and the grid struggles to come back online, why is the danger far from over? Just off the coast, a new system is churning, threatening to strike a nation that is already on its knees. To understand the sheer scale of this disaster, we must rewind to January 27. Meteorologists watched with growing concern as a system formed over North America, slowly intensifying into a powerful winter engine with central pressure dropping ominously toward 962 hectopascals. It was not a localized event, it was a sprawling giant. By January 26, NASA satellite imagery captured a chilling portrait of the storm's reach, a bright white band of snow stretching unbroken from the American Southwest all the way to the northeastern tip of the country. With winds gusting near 70 miles per hour, Fern had become the defining storm of January, touching nearly every layer of daily life for tens of millions of people. The initial impact was sheer, overwhelming volume. In the mountains near Bonito Lake, New Mexico, the skies unleashed 31 inches of snow, burying the landscape. But as the storm rolled east into Texas and Oklahoma, the precipitation transformed into something far more insidious. Snow mixed with heavy sleet and freezing rain, turning major interstates into slick, invisible traps. Vehicles slid helplessly off elevated ramps, and the first wave of fatalities began to emerge from traffic accidents and exposure as people ventured onto frozen waterways. The intensity was historic in Little Rock, Arkansas, over 6 inches of sleet piled up in a single day, shattering snowfall records that had stood since the late 1800s. Meanwhile, far to the north in Siegel, Minnesota, temperatures plunged toward a life-threatening -43 degrees Fahrenheit, creating a scenario where any loss of power was not just an inconvenience, but a direct threat to survival. By January 24th and 25th, the heart of the storm was no longer just a meteorological curiosity. It was a physical assault on the infrastructure of the Mid, South, and the Ohio Valley. In Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio, the atmosphere unleashed a punishing combination of precipitation, stacking bands of snow and sleet anywhere from 6 to 13 inches high. But the snow was not the primary enemy here, it was the ice. In parts of Kentucky, freezing rain encased the world in a glaze nearly 1 inch thick, a burden that modern engineering was not designed to withstand. Under this crushing weight, the sounds of the night were punctuated by the violent snapping of ancient trees and the cracking of utility poles, bringing down high voltage lines and pushing nationwide power outages past 1 million customers at the peak of the crisis. As Fern curved toward the East Coast, the focus shifted from the rural dark to the paralysis of the major metropolitan corridors. Washington, D.C. was buried under almost 7 inches of snow, while Philadelphia recorded more than 9 inches in a single day, marking its heaviest daily snowfall since the blizzard of 2016. Further north, in Boston and across New England, the totals were staggering, exceeding 20 inches. This immense volume of snow did more than just alter the landscape. It severed connections, shutting down schools, bringing rail networks to a halt, and forcing the cancellation of thousands of flights. Yet, even as the last snow band drifted offshore, the true magnitude of this disaster was only beginning to reveal itself, measured no longer in inches of accumulation, but in the silence of unlit homes and the sudden loss of life. When we attempt to calculate the human toll of Winter Storm Fern, the data is grim and disjointed, reflecting the chaos of the event itself. While some major international news outlets conservatively estimate the death toll in the mid-40s to 60s, a more comprehensive tally based on state and local reports indicates that at least 106 people lost their lives due to the storm and the brutal cold that trailed in its wake. These are not just statistics, they are stories of systemic failure repeating from state to state. In Tennessee, Louisiana, Kentucky, and Mississippi, officials documented a tragic pattern of residents dying from hypothermia inside their own unheated homes, or succumbing to the elements after their vehicles slid off icy roadways. The desperation to stay warm birthed a secondary, silent killer. Medical examiners reported a spike in carbon monoxide poisoning as families, stripped of electricity for days, brought generators and grills indoors, unknowingly filling their living spaces with deadly fumes. In the Northeast, specifically New York, the threat took a different form. Here, the heavy, wet composition of the snow proved fatal, leading to cardiac events as residents collapsed while shoveling. Others perished in multi-vehicle pile-ups caused by whiteout conditions, or died waiting for help that could not arrive because side streets remained blocked by impassable drifts. This was not a storm that allowed for passive observation. It reached into homes, cars, and workplaces, and for many, it offered no second chance. Even as the skies clear over much of the country, the danger from Winter Storm Fern has not passed. It has merely changed form. The response effort has now entered a long, grinding recovery phase, where the true resilience of the grid is being tested hour by freezing hour. Utility crews have managed to bring nationwide outages down from a peak of over 1 million to around 400,000 customers who remain stranded in the dark. But progress is dangerously uneven. In Nashville, local reports indicate close to 99,000 customers are still without electricity after what some utilities are describing as their worst ice event in decades. Further south in Mississippi, tens of thousands remain offline, and in the hardest hit rural pockets, residents are being told to prepare for several more days without power. With nighttime temperatures in these regions continuing to drop well below freezing, every hour without heat transforms from a discomfort into a critical medical risk for the elderly, young children, and the chronically ill. The disruption extended far beyond the power grid, inflicting a systemic shock on the nation's transportation network that rivals the height of the COVID era. Analysts estimate that approximately 20,000 flights were canceled over the peak days of the storm. American Airlines alone bore the brunt of this chaos, accounting for at least 10,000 of those cancellations. On January 28th, the airline scrubbed more than 400 flights, roughly 15 to 16% of its daily schedule, as it struggled to rebuild operations at frozen hubs in Dallas, Fort Worth, Charlotte, and Philadelphia. The financial toll is staggering, with the airline facing an estimated $150 to $200 million in weather-related losses, while passengers continue to navigate multi-day delays on both domestic and international rates. But as communities attempt to dig out, a new threat is taking shape on the horizon, turning this into a compound disaster. Forecasters are now tracking a developing nor'easter just off the East Coast, a system with the potential to rapidly intensify into what meteorologists call a bomb cyclone. This new storm is projected to move toward the Carolinas, Virginia, the Mid-Atlantic, and New England in the coming days, threatening to dump up to 12 inches of fresh snow in coastal zones. Wind gusts could reach 60 miles per hour, creating blizzard-like conditions if heavy snow aligns with low visibility. The danger of this second system lies not just in its strength, but in its timing. It is striking an already stressed landscape. Roofs are still groaning under the weight of the previous snowfall, trees and branches are weakened, and power infrastructure is exposed. A second round of heavy, wet snow and gale force winds could trigger a cascade of new outages and fresh damage just as the recovery was gaining momentum. The combination of wind and low pressure also raises the risk of coastal flooding, threatening to push water inland along the shoreline. For cities and towns from the Outer Banks to Maine, the concern is absolute. The infrastructure is fragile, the crews are exhausted, and nature is reloading for a second strike. As the immediate chaos begins to subside, we are left with a silence that demands an explanation. In the weeks and months ahead, Winter Storm Fern is likely to be remembered as far more than just another entry in the meteorological archives. Forecasters, emergency managers, and policymakers are already filing this event under a single, weighty label, historic. But why? What earns a storm that title? It is not merely the wind speed or the depth of the snow. It is the ruthless efficiency with which Fern combined heavy snow, crippling ice, and deep, penetrating cold, and sustained that assault across such a vast geography. It was a perfect storm of variables that performed a brutal audit of the American infrastructure, exposing weak points that officials have been warning about for years. We saw power grids that simply buckled under the sheer physical weight of ice and wind. We watch transportation networks collapse, proving once again that our modern logistics cannot cope when a single major hub shuts down. And perhaps most damning of all, we witness communities, in both the deep south and the frozen north, that remain woefully unprepared for the reality of days without electricity and heat. This brings us to the question everyone is asking: is this the new normal? Scientists and climate analysts are incredibly careful with their language here. They will tell you that no single storm can be blamed entirely on climate change. But look closer. Fern fits terrifyingly well into a pattern that experts say is becoming more familiar. We are seeing more frequent extreme events. We are seeing stronger, more violent contrasts between warm and cold air masses colliding over the continent. And when storms do form, they are unleashing heavier bursts of snow and rain, fueled by an atmosphere holding more moisture. For urban planners from Dallas to New York, the lesson is stark. Winter planning can no longer be based on the safe averages of past decades. It must now account for rarer, but infinitely more severe events that push our systems to their absolute limits. This reality forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about investment. How much is a life worth? How much should be spent to harden power lines or bury cables deep underground? How do we upgrade drainage systems, redesign our roads, and expand our snow removal fleets? And crucially, how do we improve public warning systems? We need systems that do more than just tell people a storm is coming. We need to help them understand what the bone-chilling reality of a long outage will actually feel like inside their own homes. And just as important, how do we protect the most vulnerable residents? The elderly, the sick, the poor, who have the fewest resources to ride out days of disruption. The answers to these questions will shape not only how the United States remembers Fern, but how ready it will be when the next historic winter storm inevitably appears on the map. In the end, the story of Winter Storm Fern is not just a list of numbers. It is a reminder of how quickly the veneer of normal life can fracture when weather, infrastructure, and preparation all collide. Consider this: a single storm, over the span of a few days, managed to shut schools from the south to New England. It canceled thousands of flights. It darkened hundreds of thousands of homes. And it left a death toll that will take time to fully understand. For millions of people, Fern will not be remembered as a headline. It will be remembered as the week the lights went out and the cold came in. For those now looking ahead, the message is simple. Pay attention to official forecasts and warnings. Have a plan for what you will do if the power fails, if the road's close, or if a second storm follows close behind the first. Check on neighbors who might not be able to manage on their own. As communities and leaders debate how to rebuild, the choices they make will decide how resilient our towns and cities will be when the next extreme winter system arrives. If you lived through this storm, your experience matters. What you saw, what worked, and what failed will help shape how all of us prepare for the next one. So I ask you, what changes do you believe your community needs to be better prepared before the next winter storm arrives?